I've never heard of worse than forecast weather. That is very odd. The icing air mat is present because of ice. Get you flying in while you can. Hey everybody, welcome back to AeroSafe, the weather analysis for general aviation pilots. My name's Erica Gilbert. I'm a flight instructor and instrument instructor located in Central Kentucky. Here on AeroSafe, we do an in-depth weather analysis targeted for the general aviation pilot. We're flying piston aircraft. We don't have the ability to get above the weather. We don't have structural anti or de-icing equipment, and we're overall limited in the capabilities of our airplane. We're going to look at general areas of VFR weather, general areas of IFR weather, some potential hazards that could exist within both of those areas. We use FAA-approved sources of aviation weather to make this analysis and walk you through what's going on right now. Weather is a causal or contributing factor in far too many general aviation accidents. So there's a few goals here on AeroSafe. The biggest one is to help educate you on how to do an in-depth weather analysis, how to use these aviation products, bring them all together to help broaden your scope of understanding of what's going on in the environment. The second thing that we want to do is help you make that more informed go or no-go decision based on the current conditions as they stand. With weather being a contributing or causal factor with so many accidents, there's a disconnect between weather hazards and pilot decision making. The goal of AeroSafe is to help prevent you from being another one of those accidents. We're going to start with our surface analysis. We've got a large area of high pressure on the East Coast. It's largely over that Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky area. Now there is a little bit of a trough to the east of that high pressure, but vast majority of the eastern US does have this high pressure system. As we move westerly, we see some low pressure and a warm frontalysis. So the dashed lines in this front indicate that it's a frontalysis and losing strength. All around that, we do see different areas of high and low pressure over the four corners and some various troughs. Over Montana, Canada, we do see some stationary, warm and stationary fronts with low and high pressure systems. Over California, we've got high pressure, and then on the west coast, we have a stationary front that's topped off with an occluded and a low pressure. The lowest pressure I see on the chart is 985 millibars. That's up over the ocean towards Alaska. Highest pressure I see is over Kentucky currently, 1039 millibars. We're going to look now at our interactive map and get an idea of how these different fronts and pressure systems are interacting within the atmosphere to provide actual observed conditions on the ground. As to be expected from the surface analysis chart, we do see a large area of VFR weather on the East Coast. A high pressure system is associated with generally good weather. We don't have rising air creating big convective activity, and if there is precipitation, it's going to be more showery than stormy. What we can experience sometimes with high pressure systems is some low level turbulence, maybe a little bit of wind shear, and sometimes some low visibility. High pressure can be thought of like a blanket, keeping all that smog, fog, anything that could limit visibility and smooth surface winds from being present. Columbus here, they have overcast at 2,500, 10 statute miles of visibility, and there are some other some other airports that are reporting marginal VFR around the Great Lakes area. Generally speaking, Eastern US is VFR and the Midwest is VFR as well. Now there is some weather over Texas. Austin, we've got 6 miles of visibility. We've got rain and mist overcast at 700. Now that's a result of that low pressure over the tip of Texas and that warm front that's moving in as well. Colorado here at Grand Junction, we do see some IFR being reported. 10 miles of visibility, broken clouds at 700 feet and rain. Ely, we do see that it's VFR, reporting VFR, but there is a layer of clouds at 1,000 feet. Few at 1,000, broken at 3,900, overcast at 5,000. As a VFR pilot, you could take off. You could climb through the clouds between that few layer, maintain your VFR cloud and visibility weather minimums. What is the trend? Is that layer of few clouds going to come in and be scattered? Is it going to come in and get thicker and become broken or even overcast? Then as a VFR pilot, you took off, you're above this solid layer of clouds. what do you do now? And in fact, if we look at the TAF, that few layer becomes scattered at 1,000, no longer few. The TAF is already predicting a trend towards decreasing weather. So what does that mean for what's actually going to happen? Could it be worse than forecast? I've never heard of worse than forecast weather. Salmon, Idaho, it is VFR with a ceiling, 8 statute miles of visibility, few clouds at 6,000, broken at 9,000. Now that's definitely an area where you could easily maintain your VFR cloud and visibility requirements. Stay well below the clouds, but the question is, around this area, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, what about the mountains, right? There is rising terrain all over the area there, and we're gonna see shortly if there's any mountain obscuration air mets. Over Bend, Oregon, it's looking beautiful in VFR. Winds are 220 at 4, 10 miles visibility, clear skies. That's an absolutely beautiful VFR day in Oregon. It is predicted that visibility is going to go down and we're going to get some rain showers coming in. That is from the stationary front that's currently hanging out over the coast. It's going to trend worse because of this stationary front that for now is not moving, but will eventually move across towards the east. That's going to push those low ceilings, that's going to bring in some bad weather, and it's not going to be a favorable situation. So if we were to look at general areas of VFR weather versus IFR, that whole eastern part of the US, like the whole half of the US, is going to be a VFR with some little areas here and there that are not VFR. That's going to be mostly around the Great Lakes areas. Moving into Texas, we do see some precipitation. We do see some low-level ceilings and some lower visibilities. That's going to be IFR stretching up through Arkansas. The central part of the US would be mostly VFR as well, and then trending conditions are becoming less favorable as we move to the west across the US. So there are pockets of VFR weather and pockets of IFR weather. The VFR areas, you do need to be very mindful of not just the lowest ceiling, but the lowest cloud level. There are some low-level clouds at some airports, say 700, 1,000 feet. Those layers are predicted to cover more of the sky as time goes on. Get your flying in while you can. The next thing we're going to look at is going to be some of our air mets. The air met Zulus and the freezing levels. Now the freezing level shows us the lowest altitude at which air temperatures are freezing. Big portion of the eastern and middle part of the US has freezing level at the surface. Areas that show there's multiple freezing levels. So this big one here shows there's multiple freezing levels between the surface and 11,000 feet. Number one, that's a very large area. Number two, that's a very large vertical distance. If you follow that freezing level at the surface line, anywhere north of that, if you are in a cloud, you're gonna experience icing conditions, which is, as we talk about all the time, your outside air temperature is freezing or below and your invisible moisture. Now in these light piston aircraft that we fly, we don't have structural anti-icing or de-icing equipment. You need to cancel the flight and wait for skies to clear up. So for example, if you're flying over here in the Ohio or Great Lakes area, Columbus has overcast at 2,500. And temperature is -5. If you're in a cloud, you're going to experience icing in those conditions. It's going to be disastrous. This icing air met says that we've got bases at 7,000, tops at 19,000 due to ice, of course. They always give a reason for the air mets. So the icing air met is present because of ice. So if you're in a cloud and you're within those altitudes, you're gonna very likely experience moderate level icing. In the far northeast, we've got icing air met from the surface to 9,000, which is interesting because I don't see a whole lot of reports of clouds here. Most of that air met does cover areas of clear skies. So I'm wondering if that guy is lingering. This one's still lingering around, but it's actually no longer valid. What's interesting to me is that we don't have an air met over Pennsylvania, Idaho here for ice. Weird. I don't know why there's not an air met here, but there is one up over Maine. That is very odd. All right, far northwest, we have an icing air met as well, base at 5,000, tops to 19,000 due to ice. If we look at Portland, they've got few clouds at 1,700. Temperature is 4 degrees on the surface. So that would be why this icing air mat starts a little bit higher. This air mat along that southwestern part of the US bases at 7,000, tops to 22. Now, a common theme among all of these, except that one in the far northeast that really shouldn't be there anyway, they end really, really high. 18, 19, 22,000 feet. You're not going to be able to get above that in a piston aircraft. This area is for multiple freezing levels between the surface and 14,000, Waco, Texas. Overcast at 2300, temperature is 5. Using a standard lapse rate, by the time you get to that overcast layer, you're going to be at freezing, unless there's a temperature inversion. But we can't assume one way or the other. The most conservative and most safe thing to do is assume a standard lapse rate, 2 degrees per 1,000 feet. By the time we get to 2300, we're right at the freezing level and in a situation that we could encounter ice. And if you look, Waco is right on the line of that icing air mat. Mount Pleasant has overcast at 4400, temperature is 0 on the surface. As for why there's not an icing air mat that extends across this part of the country as well, I'm not sure. I wonder if our graphical air mats are lagging behind a little bit. We're looking at areas of icing that's going to be pretty much anywhere that you're going to encounter instrument conditions. Let's look at air mat Sierras. These are going to show areas of IFR and areas of mountain obscurations. So there's not really intense mountain obscuration in that area. There probably are some areas where you can't see the tops of clouds. So that's why that air mat is present. We do have an IFR air mat down by the southern tip of Texas, which we've already talked about due to that low pressure and that warm front coming in. Now the west is really, I mean, you guys have been just like slaughtered lately in terms of when I've been looking at these weather analysis. Mountain obscuration and IFR all across the region. Mountain obscuration is definitely not an area that a VFR pilot needs to be flying into. You're going to wind up in a situation with the inability to see the hard things that you can smash into. No-go situation. In the event of an instrument pilot flying in mountain obscuration, you really, really, really want to be very thorough. 91-103 items, your pre-flight action. You want to make sure that you've briefed your departures, you've briefed your approaches. You know that you can meet the performance requirements for those procedures. These areas have large swaths of icing, so that would be a no-go anyway. These air mat Sierras confirm everything that we've talked about already about those areas of instrument conditions. Let's look now at air mat Tangos. This is going to tell us about turbulence, surface winds, etc. There's low level turbulence up in the northeast, moderate level severity from the base to the surface, large area of low level wind shear from Oklahoma up to Minnesota and Wisconsin, Michigan. Where this is really a problem is when you're on final approach. The loss of 20 knots on final could put you at or below your stall speed. Dangerous situation to be in. I don't fly in low level wind shear as a general rule. Now the green areas are areas of high turbulence, so that's going to be 18,000 feet or above. It doesn't really apply to us as piston pilots. It does give us an idea of the overall stability of the atmosphere. Turbulence means that the air is really moving around. The West Coast has lots of moderate low-level turbulence from the surface all the way up to 18,000, so you're not going to be able to have smooth rides anywhere in there. And then this area in Northern California, Nevada, Southern Oregon, some low-level wind shear of 20 knots or more below 2,000 feet AGL. So similar stuff, Texas and New Mexico here, low turbulence, high turbulence, and some low-level wind shear as a result of that low pressure system and the warm front coming in. Some additional hazards associated with the weather that's coming in. SIGMET for high turbulence off the west coast, severe turbulence. Look at some PIREPs now. The negative icing in Ohio. Cleveland, we have a PIREP during climb, no icing. PIREPs for light turbulence over Alabama. Here's a report for some icing. Texas, moderate icing, mixed. Temperature was -4, flight level 160. So there are a lot of negative reports of icing and turbulence, and there do exist also some reports of turbulence and icing. I wish there was a way that we could break this up based on altitudes. Maybe I'll talk to Jeff Arnold about that soon. PIREPs are really important because they give the most up-to-date and accurate information about current observations. This isn't meteorological theory or forecasts. This is actual pilots in actual aircraft and what they actually observe. This is the most... So we can look at the charts and the data and get an idea of what kind of conditions we may run into. But until we really look at the PIREPs, we're not really sure if what's forecast or what we can reasonably expect may be happening is happening. And there's often a lot of overlap between the forecast and expected conditions and the actual observations. Quick second to look at winds aloft, 5,000 feet. This heavily weighs into decision making, fuel planning, and stops along the way as a general aviation pilot. Along Michigan and Minnesota, we see 50 knots or more. Now over Nebraska and surrounding states, we see strong winds there as well, 30 to 40 knots, very, very strong. Over Texas, very strong winds as well. It looks like throughout most of the rest of the United States, it's not going to be really strong winds. If, for instance, you were flying from Minnesota to Nebraska, you'd want to be very mindful of what your ground speed is going to be and make sure that you're planning appropriately for fuel stops along the way. Let's look at surface prog charts for the next couple of days. Tomorrow looks like that high pressure system is going to be moving over towards North Carolina. And on the backside of it, we're going to see some precipitation and an area of thunderstorms down over South Texas. Low pressure along a cold front and trough over Minnesota. That's probably going to bring some nasty precipitation up there, and it's going to be cold, so it's going to be freezing precipitation. Stationary front with lots of low pressures along the way coming down from Montana. Just hanging out and bringing lots of gross stuff shortly. High pressure over Idaho, Wyoming, and then the back side of that high pressure, we've got low pressure with a trough that extends all the way from essentially Washington to Mexico. Along the coast, there's going to be low pressure with occluded front, and they are saying that's going to bring some thunderstorms along the coast of California. Thunderstorms at the tip of Texas. 2 days from now, that convective activity over Texas, that region is spreading. So there's going to be thunderstorms there. The precipitation that was on the backside of these high pressure systems is going to extend from that thunderstorm in Texas and Louisiana all the way up through the Great Lakes. And of course, as we go farther north, it's going to be frozen precipitation. So ice, snow, etc. Cold front's going to be pushing its way down from Canada. It's going to be chilly again. A couple different pressure systems still hanging out over Wyoming, Idaho. And that trough is still going to be bringing the precipitation. And another one is forming off the west coast of Canada and Washington and Oregon. A little bit of convective activity down at the base of New Mexico, where that low pressure with the occluded front has moved down to the southeast. So on the East Coast here, we've got a couple nice days of flying weather, but it is going to turn. We're going to have a lot of precipitation. Fortunately, it is going to warm up, so the precipitation isn't going to be frozen. As a pilot, I'm looking ahead at my week and thinking, how can I still have a productive week related to flying and learning? As you look at the week ahead, what are you planning to do to stay proficient as a pilot? Comment below and answer one thing you're going to do this week. I'll reach out to you and send you an AeroSafe sticker. Thanks for watching today and fly safe. We'll see you next time. Bye.